The summer of 1960, a practice field outside Detroit, in the August heat that sits on a Michigan afternoon like something that has decided not to move. Marvin Gaye, he had not yet added the E to his last name, that would come with Motown, was 21 years old, and he was running routes. This is the part of the story that most people who know Marvin Gaye's music have never heard, because it happened before any of the music, and because the music, once it arrived, made everything before it seem like prologue. But it was not prologue to Marvin. It was his life. And in the summer of 1960, his life was pointed toward a football field rather than a recording studio. And the question of which one he would end up in had not yet been answered. Marvin had grown up in Washington, D.C., the son of a Pentecostal minister who ran his household with the particular strictness of a man who believed that the world was full of temptations and that discipline was the only reliable protection against them. Music had been present from the beginning, the church, the gospel, the singing that was part of the religious life his father had built around them. But Marvin's relationship to music, in those early years, was complicated by his father's authority over it. Singing in the church was approved. Everything else was suspect. What was not complicated, in the way that certain things are uncomplicated when you are young and physical and good at something, was athletics. Marvin was fast. He was agile. He had the combination of speed and body control that makes a running back valuable. And in the years before Motown, before the professional music career, before Anna Gordy and Berry Gordy and Hitsville, USA, football had seemed like a genuine possibility for his life. He had written to the Detroit Lions. He had requested a tryout. And in the summer of 1960, the Lions had said yes, had told him to come to camp to show what he could do, to earn a roster spot the way all the other candidates were trying to earn one. He showed up, he ran the routes, he worked through the August heat on the practice field. For several weeks, Marvin Gaye was a Detroit Lions running back candidate, and the question of whether he was good enough was genuinely open. What Marvin Gaye did after he was cut from the Detroit Lions is the part of the story that carries the most weight in retrospect. He did not go home. He did not leave Detroit. He had arrived in the city for training camp, and with training camp over, the city was simply where he was, a young man with a duffel bag and a day with no particular claim on it. He had been singing since he could remember, not professionally, not with the intention of a career, not in the organized way that the Motown system would eventually provide, but singing, the way people sing when it is simply what they do, in church, in the neighborhood, in the informal music that moved through the Washington, D.C. community he had grown up in. He had been in a doo-wop group called the Rainbows. He had a voice that people who heard him sing casually always noticed. He knew, in the way that young people know things they are not yet ready to fully act on, that music was available to him in a way that football had not ultimately been. The Lions had shown him the ceiling of one path. The question, on the day after cut day, was whether he had the courage to walk toward the other one. He went to Harvey Fuqua, the lead singer of the Moonglows, a doo-wop group Marvin had admired since childhood. Fuqua was in Detroit, and he had heard Marvin sing before. The conversation that followed between them led, in short order, to Marvin joining the Moonglows for what would turn out to be the group's final period, a short stretch of performing and recording that brought Marvin into the orbit of the music industry in the very specific way that mattered. Harvey Fuqua eventually married Gwen Gordy, Berry Gordy's sister, which meant that Marvin, already in Fuqua's world, was now one step from Berry Gordy's. He met Anna Gordy at a party in 1960. He auditioned for Motown in 1961. He was signed. The path from the practice field to Hitsville, USA, took less than a year. It ran directly through the day he was cut. The Detroit Lions of 1960 were a professional football team with a roster of men who had been playing competitive football at the highest level for years. Marvin Gaye had not. He was talented in the way that people who have natural gifts for physical movement are talented, fluidly, instinctively, with a quality of bodily intelligence that coaches recognized immediately. But talent, in a professional training camp, is a starting condition rather than a sufficient one. The question was not whether he could move. The question was whether he could move against the specific, refined, professional violence of men who had been doing this their whole lives. The answer, as the weeks of camp progressed, was becoming clearer than Marvin had hoped. He was not big enough by the standards of the position. He was not, despite his natural quickness, fast enough when measured against the stopwatch times that professional scouts used to evaluate backs at that level. He had the instincts, but not the experience, the gifts, but not the full package of physical and technical development that a roster spot on a professional team required. These were not failures of effort. Marvin trained. He worked. He brought to the practice field the same quality of intensity that he would later bring to a recording session. The complete presence, the full commitment, the unwillingness to be somewhere without being fully there. It was not enough. Cut day came. The experience of being cut from a professional sports roster is, by the accounts of the men who have been through it, one of the more specifically painful things that can happen to a person who has invested months of effort into a single outcome. It is not simply the loss of a job, it is the loss of an identity, the abrupt removal of a future that you had been living toward as if it were already real. The coach delivers the news. The locker is cleaned out. The practice field becomes somewhere you used to go. There is a particular way that the wrong door closing leads to the right one opening. Not as a comfortable cliché, but as a structural reality in the lives of people who have two genuine gifts and are only going to be allowed to develop one fully. Marvin Gaye was a gifted athlete. Genuinely gifted. Not in the way that people say this about someone who tried hard and came close, but in the way that coaches who watched him in camp described him, with the specific vocabulary of men who had spent their careers evaluating physical talent. He had something real. It was simply not enough for that room, at that level, at that moment. He was also one of the most naturally gifted vocalists born in the 20th century. That gift would not have an equivalent ceiling problem. That gift, once directed and developed and given the right container, would prove to be the kind of thing that rooms do not cut. What the Detroit Lions gave Marvin Gaye by cutting him from their roster in the summer of 1960 was not a failure. It was clarification. It removed the ambiguity about which life he was going to live. It closed the door that had been partly open, and in doing so made visible, clearly and without further negotiation, the door that remained. Marvin Gaye signed with Motown Records in 1961. His first single was released the following year. His voice, the one that had been singing in churches and on street corners and in doo-wop groups since childhood, found the container it needed. And over the 22 years that followed, it produced a body of work that has not been equaled in the history of American soul music. None of it would have happened the way it happened if the Detroit Lions had kept him. The best day in the career of Marvin Gaye may have been the day a football coach handed him a duffel bag and told him his services were no longer required. He walked off that practice field and into the rest of his life. He was 21 years old. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did anyone else.